It's time for Arrested DevOps, the podcast that helps you achieve understanding, develop good practices, and operate your team and business for maximum DevOps awesomeness. I'm your co-host, Matt Stratton, at Matt Stratton on Twitter.
I'm your co-host, Trevor Hess, at Trevor G. Hess on Twitter.
And I'm your co-host, Bridget Krumhout, at Bridget Krumhout on Twitter.
Arrested DevOps is brought to you by 10th Magnitude, a cloud services company that figures if you're listening to this podcast, you must be pretty cool. You can find out about joining their cloud services team at arresteddevops.com/10th Magnitude.
This episode is also brought to you by Datadog, a monitoring tool that helps bridge the gap between operations and dev teams. Datadog brings together system metrics, changes, alerts, and events from over 70 common infrastructure tools, such as Chef, Docker, and AWS. So the dev and ops teams share their key data and alerts in a single place and collaborate on issues in real time. Datadog is available for a free 14-day trial at arresteddevops.com/Datadog.
John Willis is joining us now. We've been pestering him to be on the show since practically the beginning, and now we got him. John, tell us a bit about yourself, and let's get going.
Yeah, I think I said this to Matt a couple of times. Hey, I felt that you guys didn't like me. But then he pointed out a couple of times where I screwed up, and it was my fault for not coming on. So I can't say that this time. But yeah, no, it's awesome to be on the show. I'm John Willis. I'm Botchagaloop on Twitter, and I think obviously been, DevOps has been very dear to me, at least over the last 6 years as it has been defined, and probably the last 35 years as it's not been defined, being kind of an IT operations junkie my whole life.
Awesome. All right, so John, let's talk about, we're here today to talk about DevOps Days. And we figured that you're a pretty good person to talk to about this. You've been to a bunch of them over the years. And maybe since we've been telling our listeners for months and months now during all the conference and event sections of the podcast, hey, this DevOps Days has an open CFP, and hey, you should go to that DevOps Days, and hey, I'm going to be helping run this DevOps Days. You want to just kind of give us a quick TLDR on what is a DevOps Days? Like how'd they start? What are they?
Yeah, so it's I think so back in the early, like 2006, 2007, they started these things called bar camps, and I know Patrick, and somewhere there this evolved these kind of open spaces things, and I get we all know Patrick DeBar, we call him the godfather of DevOps, certainly DevOps Days, and he created the first one kind of by accident in that he was frustrated that he couldn't get velocity. He was trying to get other well-known organizations to address this opportunity of devs and ops working harmoniously or collaborating, right? And he felt strong. So he ran his first DevOps Days in Ghent in 2009. I was very fortunate that I happened to be listening to Andrew Schaefer on a podcast. Almost fell off the road when he mentioned agile infrastructure or agile operations. I almost got into an accident because I thought, okay, this is what my life should have been all about. And I immediately called him and said, what is this agile operations stuff? And he said, well, there's some guy in Belgium that apparently is, and I got in touch with Patrick, and I think I was the only American there. But to keep it short, it's a structure of which people come to collaborate in a non-egotistical way, and you find all these brilliant people. And I'm not trying to say that it's a unicorn event, but you find all these very passionate, very smart people, and the format is just worked very well. It's usually 2 days. Some events have one, but most 2 days, where you have morning sessions with known speakers. In fact, typically there'll be a keynote of somebody who is kind of invited, and then there'll be a CFP where most of the community, local and global, will try to sift through and try to present the best possible agenda. And then the afternoons are what we call open spaces, where people actually get to kind of create their own topics and have open discussions and round chair circle, anywhere from a learning opportunity to an overview of a new technology to just a general discussion about some very complex items. So just to wrap it up, it's I remember early on for me, my career when I started out was, it was a lot of egos in my early career. I mean, you'd walk into these rooms with people who had Michelson awards, like these performance, almost, medals of honor, and you couldn't have a technical conversation with them. And all of a sudden, I'm meeting all these young, fascinating, brilliant people. I mean, it's literally starting in 2009, 2010, and people that were just amazingly smart and passionate that seemed to, at least when you walked in the door of a DevOps day, there seemed to be no ego. And early on, I would, I've been done a lot of keynotes at DevOps Days, and I always say, let's make sure that this is not the one that changes that. And here we are, what, 6 years in?
6 years.
And I still get chills thinking about, the conversations that I have with people, and some of the people are just amazing thinkers, and it seems like everybody checks their ego out the door. So I said I keep it short. It's an amazing event. If you have not been to one, there are plenty all over the world now. I think, Bridget, we said there's like 22 this year.
Mm-hmm.
And you really should find your way to one of these events. It really is a fascinating. And you get to meet like people like Matt and Bridget and all sorts of great people.
And
I was just going to say, listeners of the show have heard the story before about my transformative DevOps moment, which also involved driving in a car, listening to a podcast, which was listening to DevOps Cafe when you had Jez on, and it was the first DevOps Cafe I ever listened to, and I was listening and literally yelling at the radio about how that could never work at apartments.com and blah, 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 and then Jez drops the whole, HP LaserJet firmware story, and I went, oh, and today it's this. So it's kind of fun that I'm like, oh, you had a transformative podcast episode, moment in your car too. So
let's make sure people don't get into accidents.
Yes, please. Hopefully, we there is an implied waiver for podcasters that we are not responsible for. If you have such great big thoughts while you're driving and listening to our thinking. So
yeah, this is a Saul of Tarsus moment that you both have. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm thinking, like, looking at the hockey stick growth of DevOps Days, from Ghent in 2009 to 22 events this year. What's your 10, since you've been going since the beginning, John? What's your 10,000-foot view perspective on how they've evolved? Like, what are the changes, and how are they the same?
I think, it's funny when we talked about doing this. It's funny how podcasts go, because you make a list of all things you think you're going to talk about, and then something like this comes up, which is, this question is a great question. I think one of the most interesting things to me, there's a lot of great technologies and great stories and always learning opportunities, but in the early days of DevOps, well, let's take 2009. There was one. Right? In 2010, I think we had really two majors. I forget, there was one maybe in Brazil or somewhere, but
one in Hamburg. There was Sydney, okay. Mountain View, Hamburg, and Sao Paulo. Yeah. Yeah,
and by definition, there you go. The two that, like, the idea was originally that people would only tolerate two of these. So we'll have one in Europe, and actually usually that was wherever Patrick had never been. Sorry, Patrick, I love you, brother, but he'd pick a city that he'd be like, okay, where have I never been? Let's have the Europe one. And we always had the one in Mountain View or Silicon Valley, because we piggyback velocity. And then, but in the early days, 2010, 2011, when you got into like 2012, if you asked how many people was their first DevOps days, there wasn't as many local ones. You would get a majority of the, very small, maybe a third or 25% of the room would raise their hand that it was their first DevOps days. About two years ago, when you asked that question, overwhelmingly, it would be like 70-80% of the room would raise their hand that it was the next, and over and over. So what we've seen is one just really encouraging hockey stick opportunity is that we're getting more people coming to these events. Because again, in the old days, because specifically the Silicon Valley one, you got to see all your old friends. Everybody came in. Ben Rockwood was there. John Osbar was there. You knew that in that event that you were going to get. And in Europe, we got to meet Chris Byetts and so people. It was a reoccurring with a small group of new people. And now what you find with all the regional ones, which is great, is literally what you're getting to meet is 75% in every event are new people that are coming in asking questions and having the same kind of aha moments that we've all had attending our first DevOps days.
Yeah, see, that's great, I think, because that takes it from being, Old Home Week and fun, but also kind of an echo chamber to being an explosion of new ideas, and also passing the same great ideas on to people who may not have an opportunity to to have heard that before, and then can take it back to their organizations. So I'm just kind of imagining like the DNA spreading throughout all of the organizations that all these people are coming from, that they can take these experiences back to.
Yeah, when it's your local community, it's really heartwarming to see that. When it was a matter of, again, you did the second Chicago one, and you're like, how many people, John, you saw how many people your first time, and it's almost the whole room. And I, as an organizer, was sitting there saying, really? You guys aren't all the people who came? Then I'm thinking, why didn't anybody come back from last year? So it's a whole other problem. But Minneapolis too was like that, right? You had and that one surprised me, because the community is the way it is. And when you're part of your local community, you almost feel like you're like, okay, well, we're going to have a DevOps Days, and there's going to be about 300 people there. And I know there's about 300 people in my local community, so I know who's going to be there. And then it's a whole bunch of people you've never met before, and then it makes you feel really good. John, to your point about it, it's spreading it out into, like Bridget said, it's disseminating it into those organizations. And if this is the community and the city where you work, it's very heartening. And we got a few Midwesterners on this podcast, and we're a little slow to adopt in the Midwest. So it really has been powerful. And John, I got to say how many people I talked to who, kind of found themselves coming to a DevOps Days because they went to DevOps Enterprise Summit, or something like that. So it's interesting, the different levels, and that's something John is passionately and heavily involved in, for listeners who don't know. Who, if you only listen to the Goat Farm because you're an enterprise person.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love the localization, right? Like, there's a sweet spot in my, it was, it's a little bittersweet, right? Like this year, Silicon Valley was decoupled from Velocity, and it was 80%, new people. And so the bittersweet was Silicon Valley became like everywhere else, and again, the localization, like Minnesota, not because you run it, Bridget, but it was just a flavor of Minneapolis there, right? Having the after party at Target, and you like there's a beauty in that. The bittersweet part is, in Silicon Valley, I didn't get to meet Ben Rockwood. I didn't get to be, I didn't get to get that little time where at least 20 minutes I got to sit and talk to Ben Rockwood about Deming, or, and. Well,
you probably have to go to Chef Conf for that now, right?
There you go. But yeah, I think again, the local the localization of it is really to watch the community learn about themselves. And then to get the flavor of those, like Chicago, right? Like Chicago, I got to go to the Chicago one. Like,
deep dish DevOps.
It was so deep dish DevOps. Like you knew you were in Chicago. Like you could have just transported me, and and just transported me I'm not gonna tell you where you're gonna wind up, John. You're just gonna get transported and put in the room. And I think within about 10 minutes, I would have figured out, you know what, I'm in Chicago. So.
I think that's important. Like when we think about the events, and I wrote a blog post last year that I'll link to, where I used to be very involved in swing dancing, and the parallels between the swing dancing community and DevOps community are really interesting to me. And that the parallel that I see in this case is there used to be these things called Lindy exchanges, and I look at them as similar to DevOps Days, where they're very community, local type events, and they started because a whole bunch of dancers in Chicago went to San Francisco, met some new friends, and invited them to come back to Chicago for a weekend. And they're like, wow, and then took them out to like all their favorite places to dance. And then what's happened, though, and I think this is the parallel, I'm going somewhere, to what you're talking about with Silicon Valley, is that over time, as these things became big, so people would say, oh, well, I want to have a Lindy exchange in my town and everything, and we'll invite people. Well, your regular venues are built for maybe 100 people coming to dance, right? But now you're bringing in 500 people. So you start ending up and you have these national swing DJs that travel, and then every Lindy exchange becomes the same, except it happens to be in your particular town. And then I think that's the trick with DevOps Days, is that there's a common feel, and I think that's something we try not to do, is, like you said, you're doing a balance of national speakers, but your local speakers. You have a context that's the same, but it still is the thing that makes it special about itself, and that's maybe kind of a little bit of a bummer, like you said, with the Silicon Valley one, where it was almost like, even though it wasn't necessarily because it was localized, but that particular event had its own flavor. And as part of evolution, the flavors are changing a little bit. But I think what you don't want to do is say, I want to start DevOps Days Des Moines, and I'm going to go and I'm going to do a carbon copy of everything they did in Minneapolis, right? Because then why did it should still have the Des Moines flavor.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, actually, is John and I are both on the core team, and one of the reasons that we absolutely insist that an event is organized by people in its local community is that we want it to have the local flavor. So, like, if we talked to some people at one point who wanted to hold a destination DevOps Days, it was actually, I believe they were thinking of Las Vegas, and I'm like, that's excellent. You're going to talk to the people who run whatever meetups there are in Las Vegas, and that one didn't end up coming together. But point being, like, if you would like something to be a DevOpsDays.org sanctioned event, it needs to tie in with the local community.
Yeah, and it's interesting that when you were talking, I totally agree, Bridget. I mean, that is the way it is, and it's what keeps it kind of pure. But you were talking about the national events and all. It was funny in I think it was 2000. So in 2012, or so 2013, let me get this right. So we had 9, 10, 11. Oh, and then 12, I kind of backed off some of the organizing of the Mountain View one, right? So we were still kind of quasi in this 2-a-year thing, one in Europe, one in the US. And we were going to have it at Google. And all of a sudden, like about a month before the due date, Google said, "Oh, by the way, we're not doing food." And everybody's like, "Oh, no, okay." Because we'd had it at LinkedIn the prior 2 years, and they'd done everything. And then about 2 weeks before, maybe 3 weeks, I forget the time, they said, "Oh, by the way, we want everybody to fill out an NDA." And I'm not dissing Google, but we got on a kind of a red alert con call, and like, okay, like this is not going to work. 300 or 400 people showing up and having to call their company and ask if it's okay to sign an NDA, and imagine the line in the queue. People like me, I would have to call my employer and say, hey. Anyway, so we made a last-minute call. The Cloud Camp King, Dave Nelson, had this. I don't know how many of you guys were at that one, where we had the whole. It was that warehouse that we had the whole thing, and one of the postmortems that we had after that was, are we limiting the amount of people that possibly can come to these events, right? Because the venues that and the problem is for all you guys that have run events, you get to that point where the venues, it's like a 400, and then it's like you got to go to a hotel, and
Yep.
And so the next year we decided to go to a hotel, and it was a disaster, So I mean the logistics of, I remember Patrick calling me saying, "John, what in the hell is going on here? It sounds like they want, $10,000 just for a stage." Like, whoa. We thought stages were included. I got to the joke where I felt like at the last minute they were going to hit us for oxygen charges, and
read your bill carefully, John. They probably did.
You know what hotels charge for coffee, right?
I know, it's crazy. And
coffee's like $60 a gallon.
And lesson learned for me at that point was, this is because it's volunteer run. It's because it's like, so there was, there wasn't really any criticism from anybody, but it was like we had to outsource all that stuff. And if you don't know what you're doing and dealing with hotels, like that's what's going to happen to you. You're going to get hit with, oxygen charges the day before. And so it was kind of almost a pullback reaction that, maybe we shouldn't, let's just worry about how many people go here. And in the end, it works out well, right? Because I think you're right. I think if we had 3,000 people coming to a DevOps Days,
open space would be very complicated.
Would be really tricky, right? So, yeah, I think we got the right mix. I think this has evolved the way it was supposed to be.
I think that's that's interesting that it's sort of that mystical feel of DevOps Days capping out at a certain size kind of probably came out of that. Like let's say you'd actually had a really good experience with dealing with hotels, then it would have kind of been a little bit more like, oh yeah, I should shoot for 1,000 people at DevOps Days Chicago. But what's happened is that sort of helped frame to the point that if you talk to a lot of organizers, I feel like, or at least again the ones I've had experience with, we feel passionately that this keeping the size small is actually what makes the event the way that it is. And we've had this problem in Chicago both years that we've done it. We sell out. I mean, the first year it freaked us out because this is a little dirty secret for people who haven't organized a DevOps Days. When you do it your first time, you don't know the fact that like everybody registered, like 90% of the people register in the last 2 weeks, right? So you go this whole time going, oh my God, no one's going to come, and then you have 2 to 3 weeks of, oh my God, I have to turn away so many people. But we kept saying we want to keep it to a certain size because we like the idea that you can fundamentally kind of, if you really wanted to, talk to everybody at that event. If you're about 300, you know what I mean? You feel like everyone's having a common experience. And I will be, when you're listening this, after this particular section, I'll be editing in a conversation we had during an open space at DevOps Days Detroit with Steve Pereira and Jason Hand, and we talked about this some more too, about keeping that common experience for all the participants versus some more traditional conferences where, well, Bridget's really interested in Elk, so she's going to go to those things, and Trevor's going to go to some .NET sessions, and John's going to, just hang out in the hallway track, and, Matt's going to go do this, and then maybe over, if there are open spaces or whatever, we didn't have a common morning, and I love that about DevOps Days.
Yeah, I really like single-track conferences in general. I actually probably have a slightly different opinion of hotels just because my partner Joe has actually worked in hotel event technology for almost 20 years. So I know exactly how to read BEOs, and I know exactly where the hotels are going to get you. And we ran the first DevOps Days Minneapolis at a university, and we quickly outgrew the space. And for the second one, we had about 370 warm bodies. And we did hold it at a hotel, and that was actually a pretty smooth experience. And we think that we are definitely going to grow it next year. So I think that some of that, that gets into logistics things. And I mean, Jason Dixon does a great job with Monitorama, which is a single track conference with 600 people. So of course, it doesn't have open space, so you do have to put some considerations in there for that. I really do think that juggling logistics is part and parcel of running a conference, but it's more about what do your local organizers want to focus on? Where do they have some experience? Where do they have some desire to spend some time? Or what are they worried about or not worried about? I don't want to say that DevOps Days have to cap out at 300. I don't think they do. And I know Austin is bigger than that, for example. So it just kind of depends on your local needs. But when people are going to run one for the first time, I definitely encourage them to look at the size of their local meetup, see how many people usually show up. Ballpark, they might have 3 to 4 times as many people as that, just organically. So,
yeah. But think about what you can handle. And I think you made a good point, Bridget, right? Which depends on, in your case, you're like, hey, I have experience in knowing how to do this, so this makes sense for our particular event. But what we all know, or well, Trevor by osmosis of being, working at the office where most of DevOps Days Chicago meetings occur, running a DevOps Days event is substantially different than professional event organizing because you have mostly volunteers as your core organizers and things like that. And one thing that I think is important, you said when you're a new organizer, you're starting something out new. And I helped quite a few. I think a lot of us have helped guide different events and things like that. Kind of my take on it is, and this is what we did with Chicago, was we looked at the common format and said, well, did we want to do something a little different? And then fortunately, and I wish I could identify who it was on our team that was the smart person in this case, and I know it wasn't me. I'm going to guess it was probably Michael Lanyon, or Jerry Kettle, said, why don't we just stick with the format the first time, and then we'll think about changing it. And then, sure enough, the second year it was exactly bog standard DevOps Days. But like John said, but it was Chicago. Chicago feels different than anybody else. Minneapolis, in my mind, follows the standard, I hate to say template. It is different than every other DevOps Days. And then then there's ones like, New York has experimented with different formats. Austin does it different. And my thought is when you've done it for a while and you get a feel for your thing, go ahead and kind of, it's that shuhari thing, right? First it's obey, then detach, right? So your first few, obey, right? Even if you think like you totally DevOps Days, obey, because you've never done one in your city before. You don't know what your city's going to be like. So I think that's a good formula.
I think there's a couple of great points between both of you, what you guys both made. One, I think you're right. People, we all get this, but I've been doing this for quite a while. People say, how do I do a DevOps Days, right? I think you're absolutely. I think there's a couple of things here. One, you definitely follow the rules the first time. Like the template for doing it is so baked. Like if you want to know how to do it the way it's been done for almost every first one, and certainly a lion's share of the ones that still continue, follow the rules. I think what you did in Chicago was spot on. Learn I mean, everybody's going to have their local flavor. Austin took a lot of heat for having dual tracks. Hey, they felt, and they've done it, 5 times, I think, by my count, right? They basically have learned a lot about their community and the feedback and what they've done. So, and I think you're spot on. Follow the rules the first time, get your feet wet. And on the hotel thing, Bridget, I think you also raised an excellent point. So if we sound like hotels are evil, and that shouldn't be the takeaway, but one of the takeaways should be that if you know nothing about event planning, like be very careful about working with a hotel. In your case, Joe had experience. I mean, because Minneapolis was spotless. In fact, it was funny when I saw it. I saw that you were in Hilton or something. Like, ooh, wow, okay, that's interesting. But it was like, oh my goodness, this ran like a velocity in terms of. And I didn't know the backstory that Joe had that background, right? Like, so just like if you're listening and saying, hey, I live in a certain city, could I do this? Because I have another point about that. Is unless you have somebody on the committee who has actually worked with a hotel, probably stay away from a hotel. However, if you have somebody who has absolute experience, and to Matt's point, you're all volunteers, so be very careful about what how much food you put on your plate. You yell at you correct your kids. Like, hey, you really want to order that like steak and eggs, and and every time my young kid winds up leaving 90% of it on the plate, right? Think about that when you're sitting about the volunteer time and the time that it's going to take and all. So I think those are all good points. Another point I want to make is about growth. Again, every local venue or will learn how to learn what makes sense for them. Some might want to cap it and keep it a certain way. I think that what you guys did in Minnesota worked really well, right? It would be interesting to see that next year at like 600, 700, or 750 and see how that worked out. The logistics there. One of the things I know I'm a chatty Cathy, but you knew that before you guys brought me on the show, but. One of the things that is incredibly important, and like it makes the difference of a good versus great and possibly bad, is the proximity of the open space rooms. A lot of people talk about a venue, and I go through kind of the do's and don'ts. But I remember there was one in New York where it was at a Polytech Institute in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was fine, the location was fine, but the distance you had to travel to open spaces was, by the time you got there, the discussion was halfway done, but by the second day you basically picked the room and stayed in that room.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons we definitely found we outgrew our first venue. And I don't want to stay on this topic too long just because there's so many other great things we should talk about. But one thing that we did outgrow in our first venue was the fact that there were limited breakout space, rooms, and they were on different floors from the main hall and from each other. And that's kind of one of those things where like we didn't really think it would be a problem, and we were wrong. It was definitely a problem. There's a lot of stuff like that I think it's great that a lot of organizers have helped write the guiding documents, which is very useful, because I've seen that there's we actually have DevOps Days Istanbul is getting ready to start planning, and they sent through an email in Turkish, and I thought, I'm going to click on this thing in Gmail that says translate it, because why not? I'm kind of interested. What are they saying? With the organizer page link, and they're saying, you have to read this. This is very useful and important, or something along those lines. And I was like, yep, this is pretty great. But yeah, so we haven't heard anything from Trevor for a little while, and I know that Trevor is in the unique position on this hangout of being the one person who has not run a DevOps Days. So Trevor, do you want to give us a little bit of your perspective as an attendee?
So I've really only been to part of 2 DevOps Days Chicago's, and they're fantastic. I mean, so I got to speak this year at DevOps Days Chicago, which was awesome, and everybody was super warm and receptive. I kind of was nervous because everybody knows I do a lot more Microsoft-y things, so there's always that worry. I mean, when I'm talking about open source, but it was still nice to kind of everybody was welcome, and I was like, we're super worried because I was kind of talking about open source towards the Microsoft people who might not have been doing open source, but even the people who've been doing open source for years were all cheering at the end, and it was fun and welcoming. And I just love the open spaces as well because, between the law of 2 feet and the variety of topics, there's no way you're going to get stuck with something that's not useful.
So that's actually a really interesting point. Is you had attended the first DevOps Days Chicago, and then you chose to speak at the second one. I'm guessing that this is not, you don't necessarily speak at all of the events ever. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what the process that led you to consider speaking at a conference like this?
Well, sure. I did submit a talk for the first DevOps Day Chicago, and I think I'd mentioned this before. I was sitting in the next room from where they were organizing, and I got to hear the crackles through the wall of, I think that sounds like my talk, and then the decision not to include it.
Oh.
So I love to tease Matt about that one.
I fought for you.
I know you did.
You were in the it was the top call, so that was good.
Well, you know what? That might be a good transition discussion here. Is the Microsoft and in general what Microsoft has done in industry-wide and how it reflects in DevOps Days. Because early DevOps Days, I remember a couple. In fact, to be honest with you, I think Jeffrey Snover. We were talking before about Jeffrey Snover. People don't know Jeffrey Snover's amazing transformer of Microsoft in so many ways, the inventor of PowerShell, and we could go on and on and on, and we won't. But in an early Silicon Valley one, he submitted, and it got rejected. And it got rejected because it was Microsoft. And me and Damon had already had him on the podcast. And Damon was the one who got on our DevOps Cafe podcast. He's like, we got to get this guy on the show. And I was actually being like, really, Microsoft? Okay, sure. And we got him on the call. Even on the pre-call, I found out our careers were similar. We both worked with Tivoli at the same time. It was like, oh my God, you're a fascinating person. And so by the time the CFPs were rolling along, I forget what year this was. Me and Damon are yelling and hollering like, we got to vote this one. Why are we not doing it? And the general consensus was, Microsoft just doesn't fly at a DevOps Days. And thank goodness. Thank goodness. I think the changes in Microsoft in terms of leadership and what they're doing and how they're embracing new technology, and now it is common to see Microsoft presentations at DevOps Days, and as it should be.
It's common to see Microsoft sponsoring DevOps Days.
Mm-hmm.
There was and I'm going to get it potentially wrong, but it was at Boston. I think Boston's was at Microsoft. There was one that I remember seeing was at an actual. Oh, New York was at.
Well, the New York's, they've always been, it was the difference between them committing, those centers that they have, like the Boston one, what is it called, the Nerd or whatever, and then New York one. They've always been, that's a group that just basically says, if you got an event and you're not going to blow the place up, certainly come here and use it if the date's available.
And if you are going to blow it up, just pay for it.
Yeah, that's right. If you're going to wreck the room or something like that. But in general, even then, that still wasn't kind of an overall acceptance until we actually started seeing, like you said, them showing up as sponsorships. Actually, the CFP selection committees saying, "Oh my goodness, we could actually have Jeffrey Snover keynote. That would be awesome." So I think that's been a very healthy part of where DevOps.
We'll put a link to that, the Snover episode of DevOps Cafe in the show notes as well. That's one of my favorites, and especially, John, it's just like you said, because as a listener to that episode, you can tell that, you kind of went through, again, you talked in the pre-call, I guess, which I didn't know about, but even through the episode, you could see your character arc, right?
Oh,
through certain things where you're like, oh, wow, OpenWMI, what the hell is that? You guys are
I wish we would have recorded Yeah, I wish we would have recorded a pre-call because Damon sent me this thing. Hey, I got this guy that wrote this paper at Microsoft. I'm like, yeah, sure. But I love Damon with all my heart, so I trust his. I've learned to trust his instinct, right? But so I didn't. I'm like, hey, Damon, if you're saying it's a good deal, let's do it. Like we don't question each other. I mean, it's like probably you guys have that rhythm now, right? Like it, and so, but we get on the call and we're just talking about our backgrounds, and he's like, yeah, I left DEC and I wrote this thing called Windows for NT. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That product was the only successful thing that ever worked in Tivoli. And we went on for like 40 minutes before the call comparing backgrounds, and like, were you doing Tivoli at this point? And so we had this unbelievable like pre-call call. Anyway, yeah, Snover is amazing. I'll point out one thing you might want to, and I haven't seen it yet, but there have been absolute rave reviews about his presentation at the DevOps Enterprise Summit 15, and he talks about. So I gotta say, if you don't know Snover, he was working at IBM. Microsoft did an industry hire to pull him away from IBM. To Microsoft. He went over to Microsoft. This is a really short version. He basically realized that from his background, Microsoft was not going to succeed as a systems management tooling company unless it had some form of command line or Linux-like tool chain capabilities. So he started writing this white paper and actually literally started writing PowerShell. He was then told, at your position, you cannot do this. He took a demotion and then started working on it. Now, I think he's told me, he denies it now, that he says now a senior executive walked in his office and said, what the hell did you not understand about Windows? But I'm pretty sure somewhere along the line he told me it was Steve Ballmer, but now he says it wasn't. But the point is, he is amazing transformation, and so what I've heard, he does a little bit of his history of how he got to, how he got there. And I'll say one last thing I think is amazing. I always tell Jeffrey that I can't imagine. If you look at how hard of what he's accomplished at Microsoft, imagine had he been anywhere else, what he would have accomplished. In a place that like he was fighting a battle that nobody was listening to for years, and has truly created transformation there. Anyway,
So maybe he.
Hey, but something that he said on our show makes me wonder if what you would think would be true would actually not be true. That if he was somewhere where he wasn't fighting those battles, he may not have accomplished as much as he did, because he talked when he was on with us about the challenges he had and how that really was what creates resolve and creates the driving stuff. So almost if he didn't have to fight. Again, so we love Jeffrey on this show too. So he occasionally listens. So he's probably if this happens to be one, he's sitting there going, "Why are you guys gossiping about me?"
That's a great point, Matt. That's a great point, because it's like they say Sherlock Holmes was Sherlock Holmes because of Dr. Moriarty, right? Like so, yeah. So, Microsoft was his Moriarty. Anyway, brilliant.
Yeah. Nice. Now this makes me curious to go find if we have had Snover speak at a DevOps Days. If we haven't, maybe that's something that has to happen in 2016.
I've already put him
in Austin. Although,
wonderful.
Not Austin, Amsterdam. He did one, it's in Amsterdam. But having him again is certainly not a bad idea. So.
Nice. So I'm just kind of thinking, like, looking ahead to 2016, and obviously there's a bunch of events already planned. Let's look back at 2015. Like, which ones did we all go to? Trevor, you said you made it to Chicago. That was the only one you made it to in 2015?
I was supposed to go to Paris and I was supposed to go to Minneapolis, but scheduling did not allow for that to be a reality.
Aw, we missed you. I mean, yeah, realities for me this year with job stuff and other things were and switching jobs between Drama Fever and Pivotal and whatnot. I spoke at New York, and then I ran Minneapolis, and then I showed up at Silicon Valley for like an hour, at our sponsor booth. So like that was my 2015 DevOps Days, even though I did have a lot of help and guidance that I provided to new events that were kicking off. How about you, Matt?
So so I went to DevOps Days Rockies, which was in Denver, and it was their first one, and I spoke there. Was really fun. They did a great event, and I think they're going to do a great one this year. I was at Minneapolis. I did an Ignite at Minneapolis, and Pete Cheslock screwed it up, and we're I think that's why we haven't been at the same event or same location since then. I think he's hiding from me. And again, I helped run Chicago for our second year. I kind of was consultative to Ohio. I was going to go to Ohio, but Ohio and Detroit being one right after the other, I had to pick one or the other, and Detroit solved that problem for me by inviting me to speak. So I gave a presentation and an Ignite at Detroit, and that was it. I was hoping to be able to go to Charlotte. That didn't work out because work stuff. I'm hoping to go to more. Would love to get to one of the international ones this year, but we'll see. Work is work, right? So
absolutely.
John, we were trying to figure out who went to the most, and I think when we added up the numbers overall, it was you, right? You destroy Michael Ducey, I think, in totals. There was a Twitter argument about this.
Yeah, I had 35, although what's his face, Jason, is like on my butt.
Oh. Jason went to every single one in North America.
I know.
This year.
I think you might overtake me next year. So,
I don't think Jason wants to go to any DevOps Days next year.
I'm gonna have to play. What was it? Nancy Kerrigan and the other
one. Yeah. So, if you looked on the 2015 list, John, which ones were you at?
It was I did 10. This was actually this might have been the most of one in 1 year. Again, as they grow. But yeah, I did Paris in the beginning of the year, New York. There's ones that I try never to miss, and dang you, Bridget, for doing such a good job in Minnesota, because now I might have to make that a not miss one too. But Austin and Amsterdam. Austin, I got my heart is in Austin. I try to go there every year no matter what. I love, that's the other thing is you get to fall in love with the organizers. Too, not just the people, but in Austin, they're my family. Ernest Mueller, James Wicked, and Karthik, and all. They're I feel like they're family. On the last night, we all go out to dinner on our own little dinner, and in Amsterdam, right? You've got all those the folk over in Amsterdam, Harm and all the Schuett Phils, so those are ones that I just. There's a place in my heart for those, and so I did Amsterdam. The one that was interesting also, I don't know, Matt, if you were at it. I don't remember, Bridget, the Washington D.C. one, the first government one.
Yes, Nathan Harvey put that together with some great folks out there.
Yeah, again, there's another a guy I just love, right? An organizer that just go it's worth going to D.C. just to get to hang out with Nathan, right? Although you do get to see him in other places, but the government one was fascinating because it was at the U.S. Patent Office. There was a fair amount of the speakers. One of the things early on they asked me if I wanted a keynote, and actually Nathan did. Hey John, can you do a history of DevOps? Most likely everybody here is going to be, what the heck is this DevOps thing? And I'm like, fine. And then word to the wise, core organizers see all emails. So be careful what you say about a core org, and nobody said anything negative. But there, I watched the whole debate of should this be a local event? Given its government, do we really want John to come in? And Nathan was, again, I don't think he's ever heard me say this. He was sort of my champion of, hey, John has, if we can't get Patrick, let's get John, and because he has an incredible history of this, and it worked out well, but. Long story short is a lot of the presentations were people who were deeply in the government. Mark Escher from immigration and just the list of all the different. I think we had the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. So a lot of the keynotes were people who were in the not keynotes but presentations were government agencies that were fighting the battle with DevOps. So that was a great event. I'm trying to think what else. Obviously Minnesota was brilliant. I actually Minnesota was it was a triple whammy for me. One is I went in a day early and I got to hang out at the Target DevOps Dojo. So I don't know if you've had Heather and Ross on. You probably have. I
have, in fact. A bunch of us pivotal people got to go up and take the tour and chat with those folks, and it was really great.
Yeah, Ross was on last year on our Enterprise episode, and then he went and did his own podcast. And
that's fine. So I got to spend a day at Target in Brooklyn, Minnesota. That always seems strange to me, but
I think it's in Brooklyn Park.
Okay.
Or
And
maybe Brooklyn Center. I can never remember which is which. Anyway, far-flung northern suburb.
yeah, and don't take an Uber from the airport, by the way.
Oh, yeah, no, that was really far.
That's
It's
what I
like
did.
taking an Uber to Santa Clara.
Yeah. So that was one thing. The event itself was the lineup was amazing. You had Mary Poppins. You had it was like that alone. I probably would have said, you know what, their agenda is good enough that like if I didn't know anything about anything, I'm going to go there. So it was a great event. And then like of course in my heart, I pinged Bridget and I said, I've got a 12-year-old son. What do you think about him submitting for an Ignite talk? And I love you, Bridget. I love you, Bridget.
Oh,
Again, you probably would have done it had you not known me anyway, because the kid he had a good, he had a valid talk. I mean, but my 12-year-old gave an Ignite on basically using R and data science. So I mean, so that event probably, sorry to everybody else who I love you out there, was my favorite one, but.
And by the way, after following up that Ignite, which was actually super interesting, with me getting up there and doing slides about Mark Hubbard about Pete Cheslock, I was like, what kind of a jackass am I?
No,
I put yours last on purpose because it was very lighthearted and fun.
I loved your son's talk, though. It was I
but
learned
you know
a
what?
lot.
My kids couldn't stop talking about your talk. It was the whole discussion for the rest of the week was the bot thing. Who is this guy? And they were absolutely fascinated about that whole concept of some bot going up and taking whatever he tweeted. That's all they could talk about. So you actually scored with my kids big time.
Nice. Results.
Nice. So we've talked about like a wide variety of events, and John, since you got to go to so many this year, like what kind of patterns or themes did you see emerging, like in the topics? Because of course, even though every event is independently organized and every event independently decides on what its talks should be, I'm guessing that there's kind of trends that come and go. Like, do you want to talk a little bit about the patterns you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, one that is very near and dear to me is that really kind of started not at DevOpsDays, but at scale in the beginning of the year. I read a blog article about this, and it just, the whole thing about me, it still kind of hits me hard. But again, I'll try to make this short. But I'm sitting at the Marriott and breakfast. Chris Weber is LA, works over at Chef, and very good friend of DevOps and steward of DevOps, a great young man. And it's funny how I get to call older people young, but I get the liberty of doing that. But we're having breakfast, and he says, "Did you hear about?" And he, at the time it was blah 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 because I'm horrible at names. Did you hear about such and such passing away? And I'm like, no. He goes, I think you know him. I'm like, yeah, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but I know a lot of people. I maybe do. Left at that, and then I said, well, that's terrible. A young man committed suicide in our community. Horrible. I'm sitting in the open session. It's actually the DevOps Day of Scale, which is the Los Angeles the Linux user conference, and I start realizing, oh my God. Because they're starting to do a tribute to this young man, and they show his Twitter thing, but he's kind of laying down, and you can't really see his face. And I'm like, oh my God, please don't be that the young man that I've gotten to know over the last 3 years. I'm almost crying now, right? And it was, and before I even where it was able to Google or look up his website, I realized it was a gentleman named Carlo Flores, and he committed suicide about a week before there, and it just. That whole thing just I couldn't get out of my mind for like a week. So I called Gene Kim. I said, Gene, I'm going to write this article, and I don't even know where to put it because I don't even know how to categorize it. And he said, no, you need to put this article on IT Revolution blog, and I did, and it had a major reaction. And so one of the themes in open space. Well, I was asked to do a keynote in New York on it, on burnout. I did that. In fact, the gentleman after me, Justin Lintz, actually he did an amazing presentation about his anxieties. This young, brilliant, I say use the word brilliant, young, really tall, good-looking man. Like you look at him
and pretty smart.
And pretty smart. And you look at him and say, well, how could that guy have any problems? And he gets up and talks about his troubles with anxiety. And I spoke to him after. He said, John, it was your blog article gave me the courage actually get up and give a presentation like this, right? And it was an amazing presentation. And then we saw like in Austin and these like 50, 60 people sitting around in open spaces talking about burnout. And in fact, I think it was Austin. This was an amazing point. We were in an open spaces, and Josh Corman, who I'm another big fan of over at CTO at Sonotype, we're sitting around a table because he had done a burnout survey in ITSec. And near the end, he asked how many people had seen a therapist. So there's like 40, 50 people in this circle. How many people have seen a therapist? And about 30% of the circle raised their hand. And I made the comment, like thinking, has DevOps changed the way we think? I said, I wonder how many people 4 or 5 years ago would have really raised their hand. And he looked at me and said, John, how many people an hour, 40 minutes ago would have raised their hand? In other words, we had gotten so intimate, and I said, you're absolutely right. And so there's been 4 or 5 open spaces on burnout. I've done 2 keynotes, and I decided I wasn't going to do any more. I did one in Amsterdam, and I didn't want to capitalize on this tragedy, so I said this is the last one. But I was in Velocity Amsterdam, and it was now the 3 Velocities in a row have run a burnout session. There was well over 100 people in that room. And at the end, John Osborne points at me, and again, I'm not trying to pat my ego. He gives me the kind of the eye, the two-finger eye, and he says, "This is all because of you, buddy." But so neither here nor there. The point is burnout and us trying to get a community of people. The thing in our community is we're very, very passionate about what we do. We get involved in things that can affect a lot of people. Me and Damon joke about, imagine you're working at Uber, right? And that whether you hate Uber or love Uber, but imagine the role is to eliminate all cabs from the planet, right? And you're the one who runs operations for that, the person who runs operations. Like that, the pressure that we put on young people in the thing. And I think us all being able to sit around in circles and talk about, oh, by the way, I have that problem. Oh, yeah, me too. And I don't know. I think it's unfortunate. It started with a tragedy, but the upside is we're having healthy discussions about things that were possibly hidden in a closet. So that's one of the most important, beats out any technology discussion of what has happened this year.
Yeah, that's a really profound and moving point. John, because we, as technologists, and especially as people who are working in, like you said, highly visible if something goes wrong work, and yet we ourselves are kind of hidden, there is a lot of pressure. And it's kind of that, sysadmin as IT janitor, no one notices unless the janitor doesn't do their work. I like the idea of us making sure that we're creating humane spaces for people who are dealing with, say, web stuff at scale or whatever, so that we don't forget the essential humanity of the people trying to do this work. Because it's so important, and you're right. If we're seeing these kind of discussions in our technical communities, finally, long overdue, but I really appreciate you and Gene and everyone bringing these discussions to the forefront.
I think 2 other important themes. One we can go through real quickly because we're starting to wind down. Is complexity has showed up, and that's good. We're seeing things like Kinevin, cybernetics, or Jeff Sussner's book, Designing Delivery, was brilliant if you hadn't read it. Kinevin, OODA loops, right? We're seeing this all tie about feedback loops and thinking about complexity, and that's a great subject. And so we can dig up some show notes of good presentations on that. But I think the one I want to talk about the most is, and I really, I go back to this. I'm going to make you cry, Bridget. Is that you, in a lot of ways, you changed my life because the way I thought. There we go. Huh? I did. No, the way I thought about being a male and a person, I was just kind of had blinders on about why are they always whining about this? Why are they always whining about that? Really, is it? Is this a first world problem or not? And you basically, it was something that you wrote after your first DevOps Days Silicon Valley about some little simple thing, and it the light bulb went on. You said something like the at the end of you had such a wonderful time. It was your first full presentation, I think, in DevOps Silicon Valley. You were shining like bubbly about how excited you were about the whole event, and then I knew that because I think if you remember, we were trying to have a more diverse subject, and I reached out to you. I said, I really would like you to submit here because you're awesome. I saw you in New York. You're amazing, and you did submit, and you presented, and then somebody, something I would have done easily, said, hey, let's us ops guys go out to dinner. And you wrote a really good way of explaining, not like, hey, don't use that word guys. You said, I felt like shit. And I'm like, oh my God, if I was to make Bridget feel like shit, I would really, really feel like shit. And so what that did for me is it opened up a lot of just kind of seeing things I hadn't seen before. And so in some ways, so diversity across all accounts has been a good theme in our DevOps community. We have, code of conduct started last year. It is now, is part of the manifest.
Right. Yeah, we won't merge your PR without a code of conduct.
Yeah. So and I think so in a lot of ways, it was obvious that you needed to be a core organizer, and like I think everybody thinks that's an amazing event. We added Jennifer recently, and we're going to add more women to the. But here's the thing. So we're doing. DevOps community is better than others. Like I said, I don't even want to get into this gaming community nonsense. But, we're doing better than most, but we still suck. Maybe the same thing about burnout too. Like we're getting better, but we need to crack this thing. And I'll just tell you this one story. I was in London, and this woman who had worked on UK.gov, and I don't remember her name, but she's
Anna Shipman.
Okay, good.
She's a technical architect for the government delivery services.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Anna though. It was somebody else. I know Anna. Yeah, no, it was somebody who worked on a team. She worked with Gareth, and then she was actually doing consulting for Docker when I met her. But she was obviously had all the goods of technical everything. And we were talking about Twitter, and she said, John, I said I don't expose my Twitter. When you keep your Twitter handle, I don't. And I'm like, really?
Private or whatever.
Why would anybody do that? And she went into and she, John, let me tell you something. Y'all are always talking about how we need to get more women in the STEM, how we need to get more women in technology, but nobody talks about how do we keep women in technology. And she said, I had to turn it off. And because I give a presentation, and we saw this thing with Jessie over this year with she is just a bubbly, amazing, incredibly, light flows out of her hair person to be around.
And she's also an amazing technologist and a core maintainer at Docker.
I'm kidding. I'm not like 1/100th of her technical capability.
Well, I'm just saying if people don't know who Jessie Frisell is, she is a core maintainer of the Docker project.
Yeah, and then again we could, I don't even have to link, but she got she became very prominent this year. People got to see how great she was, and all of a sudden. She started getting this ridiculousness of trolls. Stuff from
it was trolls.
Trolls, but sending pornographic pictures to her. That doesn't happen to men.
Not so much.
It's nonsense. I mean, and I think our DevOps community is better than most, but we still got a long way to go. And so diversity has been a big part of this story here.
I think Minneapolis was. Sorry, Bridget. I was going
to say.
I'm going to speak right over Bridget. So
I was going to say the exact. I think we're going to say the exact same thing about both Cowie and about John. What they both said at Minneapolis.
I thought it was funny because John got up there and was going to give his. You were introducing something. I don't. This is bad. Well, maybe it's good that all I remember is what you said, not why. I think maybe you were giving the. Oh, you were giving the Docker.
It was the open. It was the open space intro.
Open space intro, right? So you're very memorable to me, John, right? But he basically got up there and said, "Hey, very succinctly, said, someone in our community is getting this thing." He goes, "Knock it the fuck off," and then sat down, and then. I think Cowie was the next day, and then John gets up there and John Cowie gives this great, and we'll put a link to the salient part in the show notes. This whole thing about using Chef at Etsy and blah blah blah, and then And basically the last 10 minutes he goes, okay, so now I'm going to go on a rant. And I loved, he said, I hear there's this thing called Minnesota Nice, so none of you are going to leave. And he then, for 10 minutes, proceeded to say, knock it the fuck off. But here's exactly why, right? And it was, to me, this is what I thought was interesting, and I'm going to agree with the esteemed, Mr. Willis here, that my experience through doing the show and having Bridget on the show and getting to know Bridget better and everything has helped, and other things I do has helped me be aware of these things. But I think that, and it's the one thing that John said that was so right was, he said, the only part of our industry that needs more straight white males is fixing the straight white males in our industry. And that was kind of like a little bit of a siren song to me kind of thing. So that was an amazing, and it took a lot of, I'm glad that really happened, but I agree with John. We're better than anybody else, and we're awful. So it's damning with faint praise for us, the way that we kind of look at ourselves. We got a lot of work to do. But
we are doing the work. And we're doing the work around burnout, we're doing the work around diversity, and we're doing the work around interoperating between IT departments in order to create a better working environment for everyone. And there isn't going to be a done, because this is a journey. We're never going to be able to say that we have completely DevOps to all the DevOps and now we're done and it's perfect. I think that's I guess maybe that's a good place to end it, is just to say you're all right. We are on a journey of improving. And it's really nice that our community is looking at ourselves and looking at where we can improve. So, final words from you on this, John, before we start wrapping up?
No, I think it's what was one of the first things that John Osbar said about the definition of DevOps? It's something about collaboration, right? And so collaboration, Jeff Sussner had DevOps is empathy, right? It's like one of those ones like, darn, I wish I would have thought of that, right? It's about being able to be bold, brave, and communicate, to be able to discuss things and feel free about discussing things. And we talk about burnout, we talk about diversity, those kind of things. It also is being able to kind of stand in a room where you know that most of the room has way more experience than you, and feel free that you can suggest that, hey, I don't think Docker works this way when it's X, Y, Z, and not feel like, shut up, you only had 1 year experience. Why? What do you DevOps is great, and it's about collaboration. It's about empathy. It's about respect, right? Our whole code of conduct is a respect thing. I'll give you one. This was last year, but this I think was a good. You see the code of conduct, and there's some events that still say we're not going to do a code of conduct, which I think that's silly. I don't get it.
And we should clarify, not DevOpsDays events. They don't get to be on DevOpsDays.org without one.
And there's other events, that's right. But if you remember in 2014, in the Ghent kind of reunion, there was this guy that made a really bad remark during his Ignite. And he just said it, and he was kind of an old school person. And so immediately, about 5 people went up to Patrick. So the whole point of code of conduct is that, if you don't feel comfortable, go to an organizer, and that organizer should address the ability that you're uncomfortable. In short, that's basically what we say. And this person made a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and a fair amount of people, including myself, went up to Patrick, and said, "Hey, that was really not cool." And I think Patrick, someone went and talked. He was actually with a vendor. And I remember seeing him when they went up to address it. He was like, oh my God, I can't believe, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I'm an idiot. And then he begged Patrick.
John, do you want to start from he begged?
So he begged Patrick to let him make an apology. Can I have 3 minutes on the stage to apologize? And and he got up there and he said, you know what, I am an absolute idiot, and I absolutely apologize to everybody I offended. And I thought, my goodness, that if you're an organization and not DevOpsDays and you don't think code of conduct works, then you listen to that story, because that's exactly the way it should have worked. He wasn't an evil person. We shouldn't have taken him out in the back and flogged him. he made a really bad mistake. He wasn't being empathetic to his audience, but it self-corrected beautifully.
I think that's wonderful, and that's the spirit of DevOps Days right there, because you go with blamelessness, you go with, hey, you're not a terrible person, but you did something that isn't right for the organization, for the community. Let's self-correct. And having that support in place so that he felt that he could self-correct is super important. Like these are good events is basically the TLDR there.
And one last thing, in case you're listening to this, and I suspect if you're a common listener of this podcast, this doesn't need to be said. There's a lot of fun technology discussions at DevOps. So, I mean, there's some really cool stuff to learn.
Possibly something about Docker.
There's a little bit of Docker at some of them. There's certainly a lot of
There's a lot of Docker in other ones.
Yeah, no, literally, if you're somebody that's sitting around, particularly in enterprise, and just getting hammered by all these buzzwords and technologies, and oh my God, should I start with Chef? Should I start with this? Should I Puppet? Should I do that? I don't know what to do.
Your VP says you should have microservices.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Come to DevOps Days, and you'll get to hear practitioners tell you real stories about what works, what doesn't work, their opinions. Some opinions differ, so it's not just again, you should know we've got a great mix of empathy, compassion, really deep subjects, but a heck of a lot of good technology fun too.
I want to give one more shout out that just reminded me when you talked about you want to learn about a thing you don't know. So there we had a woman named Cora Hayes-Megan attended DevOps Days Chicago. It was her first DevOps Days, and in fact, actually, she's just getting started in technology to begin with. It was her basically day zero of her Dev Boot Camp was when DevOps Days started. She wrote a blog post we'll link to in the show notes about what that experience was like, about going and listening and learning about the goats and the unicorns and all this other stuff, but how it was helpful to be able to absorb those things, and I thought it's an especially interesting post because a lot of times we feel like going to conferences, and we talked about this a little bit on our conferences app, that when are you going to have a chance to really be able to talk to people who would love, not only will they be willing to talk to you, you won't be able to get them to shut up at a certain point, about how passionate they are. So anyway, she just sent me an email the other day about now she's finished her boot camp and now she's going and getting started doing work. So we'll put a link to the blog post. I thought it was really interesting, but that made me, So no matter what level, you don't have to be John Willis to go to DevOps Days and have an awesome time. And you don't have to be a brand newbie either. You can be any of the people.
And I should mention, you don't need to be John Willis or Bridget Kremhout or Matt Stratton or even Trevor, because I know we're going to get you helping with this too, Trevor. You don't need to be those people to run a DevOps Days. So I guess that's the takeaway that I want to leave you all with is wherever you're listening to this, if you would like to run a DevOps Days in your town, we can help you make that happen. So reach out, info@devopsdays.org, or just, come at us on Twitter or whatever.
The other thing I wanted to point out is you don't have to be any of the people we've aforementioned to speak at a DevOps Days. So we usually talk about upcoming CFPs. There is going to be an upcoming feature on our website in the next few weeks where they will all be listed as we know about them, and there will be a link if you are an organizer of any kind of event. Keep your eye out on our website. There's going to be a link where you can submit so that your CFPs will be included. So the whole point is come to our website and look at it a lot because I worked on it really hard. That's all. Okay. So, hey, by the way, we have a newsletter. You can sign up for it at arresteddevops.com/bananastand. It is the best way to know about upcoming podcast episodes and a good way to find out about cool news with DevOps. And we have an iPhone app if you want to use that, and you can download it for free at arresteddevops.com/iPhone.
Thanks again to our sponsors. Be sure to visit them at arresteddevops.com/10th magnitude and arresteddevops.com/datadog. Thanks so much, John, for joining us tonight, or today, or whenever this is.
This was a lot of fun. It really was. I think it's just great respect for all three of you, but certainly, I kind of figured this would be fun, and it basically lived up to expectations. So
you'll be on again. We'll corner you.
Absolutely.
And loyal listeners, if you enjoy listening to Arrested DevOps, we'd appreciate it if you would visit arresteddevops.com/iTunes and leave us a review in the iTunes store.
You should also, go ahead. While you're in the iTunes store, go leave a good review and rating for DevOps Cafe too.
Yeah.
And ask them to make more episodes.
We would love to know.
Okay, let's interrupt over again. Go ahead.
We would love to know what you thought of this episode. Please leave us comments at arresteddevops.com/DevOpsDays2015. Be
sure to check us out at
You know that website we keep mentioning.
Be sure to check us out at arresteddevops.com or at arresteddevops on Twitter. We're always happy to get your input, ideas, or feedback at shows@arresteddevops.com. Please let us know any ideas you have for future episodes. I'm Bridget at Bridget Crumhout.
I'm Matt at Matt Stratton.
And I'm Trevor at Trevor G. Hess.
We're Arrested DevOps. We're Arrested DevOps.
And remember, there's always DevOps
in the banana stand.
Bridget, your line is "We're Arrested DevOps," and remember.
I know. I kept hearing something come in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I heard that too.
Oh, we're so professional. Stop that.